We are just 68 days into Donald Trump's second term, and this new Trump era has been so chaotic that it's easy to lose sight of the fact that with each passing week, broad swaths of this country are looking more and more like The Handmaid's Tale. Forced birth, criminalized health care, providers arrested, women blamed and shamed for having miscarriages. All of those things were hallmarks of Margaret Atwood's Gilead. But they are increasingly hallmarks of a number of Republican-led states here in the United States in 2025. These are states where any miscarriage can lead to a criminal investigation, where the burden now falls on miscarrying women to prove that they didn't intend to suffer a pregnancy loss. All of this, in addition to creating a police state around women's bodies, effectively upends our justice system's presumption of innocence. Now, to be very clear, this isn't just about abortion. It's about asserting control over women's bodies and their most personal life choices. Project 2025, for example, suggests that the CDC requires every state to report the number of abortions performed. But it also urges states to report every miscarriage, stillbirth, and even, quote, treatments that incidentally result in the death of a child. That could include chemotherapy, where it is needed to treat cancer in a woman who is pregnant. Think about that. Conservatives want states to register and document every pregnancy loss, something that women have experienced for as long as women have existed. It's no surprise that since the Dobbs ruling, Atwood's imagined Gilead is becoming more and more of a reality. But I want to highlight two significant developments in the GOP's war on reproductive freedom, developments that have largely been overshadowed by the torrent of White House executive orders. In Texas, a midwife was arrested last week along with two of her employees. They were accused of performing illegal abortions. It's the state's first arrest of a healthcare provider under its new anti-abortion laws. And in Georgia, a 24-year-old woman was arrested after suffering a miscarriage from which she was still recovering when they took her into custody. Police charged her with concealing the death of another person and abandoning a dead body. And they even performed an autopsy on the 19-week-old fetus. If you can believe it, the coroner confirmed that this was indeed the result of a natural miscarriage. Yet, the criminal charges against the woman remain. Collectively, the two charges against her carry up to 13 years in prison. Consider that about 1 in 4 pregnancies actually end in miscarriage. Imagine facing criminal prosecution and a significant prison term, all while you are grieving and recovering from a lost pregnancy. That Georgia woman is not the first to watch as her miscarriage became the subject of a criminal investigation. Since the Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade in 2022, these episodes are increasingly common. Take, for example, Brittany Watts, a Warren, Ohio woman who miscarried at 22 weeks in 2023 and then faced felony charges for abuse of a corpse. She is now suing the city. Then there's the case of Amari Marsh, a 23-year-old South Carolina woman who miscarried and was arrested in 2023 and charged with murder, homicide by child abuse. She was jailed for 22 days and then placed under house arrest before a grand jury declined to indict her. According to Marsh, the arrest, quote, turned my whole life upside down. In the first year following Dobbs, at least 210 women faced criminal charges connected to their pregnancies, the most in a single year since tracking began. That's largely due to the growing movement toward fetal personhood that would seek to grant legal rights to the fetus. In the case of the Georgia woman, for example, the 19-week fetus that she miscarried was considered a person with legal rights under Georgia law. And while that woman sat in a jail cell, Georgia lawmakers were considering a bill that would punish even more women, the Prenatal Equal Protection Act, which would charge abortion patients as murderers, a crime punishable in Georgia by life in prison or the death penalty. Under the bill, fertility doctors could also face a life sentence for discarding frozen embryos. During a hearing on the bill, one fertility specialist asked lawmakers about penalties for discarding frozen embryos and the selective termination of embryos, standard practice in IVF. Under the proposed bill, she asked, quote, "Am I guilty of murder? Does that make me a serial killer? As writer Jessica Valenti notes, this isn't an issue of a single extremist state. The Georgia bill is one of 11 fetal personhood forward bills that have been introduced around the country since the start of the year. But at least one of those bills would allow for the investigation of miscarriages. Valenti writes, quote, "We warned that this would happen. In response, we were accused of fear-mongering. I don't know if it was a knee-jerk distaste of feminism or straight-up denial, but too many Americans never believed we would get here. Now that we are here, too many Americans don't seem to realize it. You can blame it on the constant overwhelm of political news and overstretched newsrooms, but I think about it in this way. 1 in 4 American women will have an abortion. If nearly a dozen states were considering legislation to jail a quarter of all American men, do you think the front pages would be silent? 1 in 5 women will have a miscarriage. If police started arresting men for something that happens to 20% of them, do you think anyone would stand for it? We all know the answer. And there's another thing about which we were warned. For years, legal and health experts who follow the anti-abortion movement have warned that conservatives will not be satisfied with allowing states to make their own judgments about abortion policy. As they explain, if you believe that abortion is murder, as many abortion opponents do, you can't be okay with California or New York allowing murder. That means then that the ultimate goal is, and always has been, the complete and total abolition of abortion in the United States. And anti-abortion regimes have been working tirelessly since Roe fell to extend their abortion bans beyond their state boundaries, settling the stage for an interstate battle between those states that have maintained abortion access and those that have curtailed it. And now that battle is shaping up between Texas and New York. This week, a county clerk in New York refused to enforce a Texas civil judgment against a New York doctor who prescribed abortion pills to a Texas patient via telehealth. In doing so, the clerk cited New York's SHIELD law, which protects New York reproductive care patients and providers against out-of-state investigations and prosecutions, as well as professional discipline and civil liability. This fight between the states that provide reproductive freedom and those that do not will surely land at the United States Supreme Court eventually. And then it will be up to the same Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade on the view that we should leave it to the people of each state to decide the abortion issues for themselves, to determine whether anti-abortion forces may impose their deadly draconian bans on the entire country. For more on the post-Roe criminalization of women's health care, I am joined by Greer Donley, an associate law professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Donley helped draft the nation's first abortion shield law, which was enacted in Connecticut, and David Cohen, a law professor at Drexel University. He is the co-author with Carol Jaffe of the newly released After Dobbs, How the Supreme Court Ended Roe, but Not Abortion. Greer, let me start with you. Texas knows that New York is not going to enforce this ruling against the New York doctor. So why are they pushing this?
They're pushing this because they want to have their abortion policies to apply to the whole country. I mean, one thing that's really critical to understand about this case is that the FDA has approved abortion pills for telehealth usage. So we know that it's safe and effective to provide medication abortion via telehealth. And we also know that the providers here were following completely their home state laws in New York. So the fact that you have Texas going after a provider who was situated in New York, following New York's laws, following the FDA's rules for medication abortion, just proves that they are, willing and trying as hard as they can to effectuate their policies beyond their state lines. And it should very much concern everybody who thinks that they are safe sitting in a blue state.
All right, David, as a number of very brilliant law professors wrote in an article, they predicted that we would see an increasing number of conflicts between states regarding access to abortion. Which of these conflicts do you think are likely to escalate and result in a showdown at the Supreme Court? Is it the SHIELD law, or could it be something else, like the EMTALA challenge that we saw the court defer last term in the Moyle case?
Well, I think it's probably the SHIELD law case, because the EMTALA case is sort of paused right now because the Trump administration has dismissed it. And there's a hospital in Idaho that's continuing it, but that's at the very beginning stages. But this case out of New York and Texas, and there's a separate one, New York and Louisiana, that raises similar issues. You've got a conflict, and the Supreme Court may step in sometime in the near future. It's really up to what the Attorney General of Texas and the local prosecutor in Louisiana do next, because New York's going to block them. Just like the New York blocked the Texas case, they're going to block the Louisiana case. And so what they do next, do they stay in state court? Do they go into federal court, and how far they take it? I think that's going to happen pretty quickly, and it may get to the Supreme Court sometime in the next year or two.
Right, Greer, as I said in the opening, the idea that this Dobbs settlement of letting every state kind of decide for itself its own abortion policy was a really untenable settlement ultimately. And now this concept of fetal personhood has the potential, if it gains traction, to settle this question once and for all, because if the fetus has legal rights, it then is in a distinct class by itself, rights that the courts are obliged to protect even above women's own rights. How is this going to happen? Is it likely to be upheld that the fetus does have legal rights if this is challenged? And where do you see this movement for fetal personhood going?
It's a great question. So, I mean, first of all, we've already seen pretty significant traction of the fetal personhood ideas in state courts, right? So we had a state court recently that found that embryos that were, frozen for IVF procedures were extrauterine people. So we already are seeing that some conservative courts are willing to kind of go in this direction. But, when we talk about the current Supreme Court, a court that is, more conservative than has been in generations, with a super majority of conservative folks on the court, we have to be very concerned about, was Dobbs just the first step in a long-term endgame of trying to ensure that fetuses are people in the Constitution, that therefore we cannot have abortion anywhere in this country. And not only would that potentially ban abortion nationwide, it would also lead to very serious consequences for miscarriage care, for fertility procedures. I mean, like you talked about in the introduction here, we have a ton of evidence that people are not only being prosecuted for miscarriages, but even, for every one person that was facing criminalization for miscarriage, you have 10 or 20 more women who are facing, nearly dying because people are afraid to treat their miscarriage care and offer their miscarriage care. So fetal personhood is a concern, not just for abortion rights, but really for all reproductive health. And it is certainly something that the anti-abortion movement has been very open about, that being their long-term end game. And so we just have to, fight against that.
All right, David, you have a new book out with Carol Jaffe that explores the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. In your view, what is the most critical issue in the post-Dobbs landscape that just hasn't received enough attention from the public or the press?
I mean, I think everything you said in the beginning, Melissa, is spot on, that we are in this sort of new world, and it's like Gilead and The Handmaid's Tale. But I think what isn't getting enough attention is that the resistance movement is strong. The abortion providers, supporters, advocates, volunteers who are out there all over the country, not just in pro-choice states, but states with abortion bans, are fighting back. And in a way, they're winning, because abortion numbers have been going up since Dobbs. I mean, Roe was overturned, and we all thought abortion numbers were going to drop. Abortion numbers have increased, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. But people, and there's a lot of people who are being left behind, no doubt. But a lot of people are having access to abortion in ways that we did not expect. And that's because people are fighting back, and fighting back in really important ways.
All right. Thank you for those updates from the post-Dobbs landscape. That's Greer Donnelly and David Cohen.